Soiled variety is the spice of life, and it doesn't get much spicier than a 40-year-old two-tone transporter. So if you like your contamination deeply ingrained, then stay tuned for a bit of exhaustive campervan cleaning. So despite being a cheery bright yellow, the exterior of this 1984 high-top converted transporter was looking a bit sorry for itself, as while its new owners love it, have been unsure of how to go about properly cleaning it, or even if it could be properly cleaned. So being the content creating philanthropist that I am, said I'd volunteer my elbow grease for the sake of a video. So here we are, faced with years worth of baked on algae, unsightly rust stains, a forecast that really didn't favour heavy chemical cleaning, and a blow-over paint job that likely wouldn't take too kindly to me getting hands-on with it. While pretty much all of the old V-Dub's exterior surfaces were begging for a deep clean, the algae-covered fiberglass roof was in the most desperate need, so would have to take priority. But I hope that the concentrated caravan-specific cleaning products I'd come equipped with would, when coupled with a fair bit of scrubbing and pressure washing, enable me to bring that and the rest of the van back to a point where it could competently serve its leisurely purpose in algae and cobweb-free fashion. So before tackling the transporter's body, wanted to get the wheels, which were technically too far gone to be fully transformed with a simple clean, out the way. So got to work pre-treating them with some Autoglym Caravan and Motorhome cleaner that I'd also be using on the van's seals, nooks and crannies a bit later, before thoroughly rinsing them off with the pressure washer. They were then sprayed over and left to soak in what soft 99 iron Terminator I had left over from my last video, to dissolve and dislodge whatever realistically could be from both the classic smooth hubcaps as well as the pitted steel rims. And although all the physical agitation in the world wasn't going to make a whole lot of difference to the wheels here, there was no reason why I couldn't leave their corresponding chunky tyre walls looking clean and presentable, so ensured they also received a thorough scrub prior to rinsing off and moving on, as I knew there was plenty of other bits on the van that would likely come up a lot better than these refurb-worthy parts. When it comes to removing years worth of ingrained grime from surfaces like the fiberglass roof of this van, it generally makes sense to just start with a pressure rinse to see how much of it can be blasted off with water alone, as there's no point splattering the rest of the vehicle and yourself with concentrated chemicals if you don't have to. Plus, it always makes for some satisfying cleaning shots, so why not? Now, while this roof's slightly less ingrained, sides cleaned up under pressure quite nicely. The baked on crud up top wasn't anywhere near as eager to budge, so just knocked it back as best I realistically could with an initial round of rinsing, knowing I'd have to come back a bit more heavy-handed in order to fully shift it. So the Fenwicks Motorhome cleaner that I bought especially recommends a couple of capfuls per 5 litres of water for general cleaning duties, but I strongly suspected that wasn't going to be able to cut it here, so went with a 1 to 10 solution instead, which is advised for more ingrained dirt, generously dousing sections of the roof in it via my handy little 1.5 litre pump sprayer, which surprisingly I only had to refill the once, before agitating it over first with a shampoo primed soft bristled mother's long reach brush, then with an additional stiff bristled item to tackle any stubborn spots which you might not be able to see here but can assure you were there. While the sides were responding well to a semi-soft agitation, the only item that was really up to the job of adequately cutting through the cack up top was sod's law a small tyre brush which had neither the surface area or reach really required to clean something of this size. But if I wanted to get it done, didn't really have much choice, so tried to make the most of it by zip tying it to the end of the mother's item, which was a bit awkward, but with some extended tiptoe action on the small foldable platform I brought along instead of a set of rickety step ladders, as I'm not a painter and decorator, gave me just about enough reach to get the bristles over the less accessible parts of the roof. And while I've essentially just stitched together the choice snippets here to give you the general gist of what went down, the reality is that when factoring in the filming, it took pretty much all morning to rid the roof of cack, as it required multiple applications of product, repeated agitations and a fair few methodical rinses, but it's unrealistic to expect to be able to adequately sort something that's been left neglected for years or possibly even decades in half an hour. So a long haul clean of the roof was always on the cards in my mind. With the top itself suitably deep cleaned, I then turned my attention to the grubby seals of the slidey windows it houses, which were sprayed over with the Autoglym stuff, thoroughly agitated with a small traditional type detail brush to tease out any ingrained black tinted grime, then thoroughly rinsed off, this time at low pressure, to try and reduce the likelihood of both the seals and paintwork below being compromised. But I was planning to give the inside of the windows a thorough wipe down towards the end of the clean, so no biggie if a bit of rinse water managed to trickle in. The rusty metal channels at the top of the yellow body, which had initially housed a fair amount of dirt and greenery, were then treated in a similar manner, and because they'd been exposed to the runoff from the roof cleaning, were already well on the way, so a fairly liberal application of product, somewhat thorough agitation and semi-pressurised rinse out seemed to do the job just fine. The only issue was that because they hadn't been adequately painted, once clean, when looking from above, you could see the original colour, but that wasn't visible from the ground level like the algae was, so it didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. Now that the top parts of the transporter had been deep cleaned, it was time to saturate and soak the rest of it, so went ahead and sprayed all parts of it in the same Fenwicks concentrate via the pumper, before snow foaming that over with some sweet smelling Auto Bright Direct jelly bean stuff and leaving it all to soak in for a fair few minutes. And there was black streaks aplenty here, which meant at least some of the grime was being gently coaxed from the surface. And when cleaning something of this size, especially if the sun is in and out, then it makes sense to do it in sections, as if you plaster every square inch of it in product up front, might find yourself struggling to get it all off before it starts drying. So just think things through before pulling the trigger. But either way, once everything had had a decent chance to soak here, the layered products were thoroughly rinsed off to eliminate as much freshly softened up dirt as possible. So the pre-soak and pressure rinse was only going to free up so much dirt, so to tease the rest of the algae, moss, lichen and grime out from the main window seals as well as a few other nooks and crannies, thoroughly sprayed them down with the Autoglym Motorhome and Caravan cleaner and agitated them over in the same manner as the windows on the side of the roof had been before. And you want to ensure you're quite thorough here, perhaps even more thorough than you think you should be, as the last thing you want later down the line is to be getting your pre-pack up swagger on thinking it's all done and then come across bits you've missed, which I can assure you can be quite disheartening. But thankfully the Autoglym cleaner seemed to be doing a decent enough job here, so after agitating all of the nooks and crannies over to within an inch of their leisurely life, went on to rinse them off to remove the nasty algae encapsulated black froth that this kind of cleaning creates. The white painted parts around the windows were peppered with what looked like either overspray from the yellow paint job or iron deposits, so quickly spritzed them with the iron Terminator to see if they'd react. And sure enough, they bled right up, confirming it was bonded iron-based contamination, which wasn't ideal considering I didn't have much fallout remover left, and even if I didn't really want to be dousing the 40-year-old van over with it for extended periods, so went ahead and just dissolved what I could here from the more visible parts, aiming to mechanically knock back the rest a bit later on in the process. Although I was planning to then go on to perform a traditional contact wash, the body still looked and felt to be contaminated with a level of grime that I didn't think a shampoo and mitt alone would be able to adequately shift, so decided to reapply a combination of the Autoglym and Fenwicks concentrate to all of the painted panels before somewhat reluctantly working them over with a soft shampoo primed brush, which will be a perfectly acceptable approach for an ingrained fiberglass bodied caravan or camper, but from a light scratch and swirl perspective isn't really what you want to be doing to conventionally painted steel bodied vehicles like this. But if I didn't want to be left with unsightly streaks and stubborn stains post contact wash, didn't feel I had much choice, so went ahead and thoroughly brush washed the van over to try and ensure it was adequately stripped of ingrained grime, including its non-painted panels and bits of trim where a brush like this can be really useful, before finishing up this initial round of heavy cleaning with one last thorough rinse, as believe it or not, that lot had taken me the best part of 8 hours and I was running on empty at this point, so left the van wet knowing that rain was on the way, because why wouldn't it be, aiming to return the following morning once it had passed to quickly re-clean, then further enhance. So I started day 2 with a thorough shampoo of the roof, not necessarily to deep clean it any further, but just to ensure any of the stronger chemical residue that had been repeatedly applied the day before was gone, and because the rest of the van was going to be shampooed as well, so it just made sense to include the roof in that equation too. Once some of Auto Bright Direct's Decon shampoo had been blanketed over the surface via a heavy duty foam cannon, it was thoroughly brushed in with the long reach item, which was a slick breath of fresh air compared to the heavy scrubbing and methodical rinsing that had to be done to get it to this easily shampooable point the day before. It was then onto a traditional contact wash with the same decon shampoo, which I've been looking forward to doing from the very start, as for me it's just the most satisfying part of the cleaning process. And I was a bit more heavy-handed with the van than I would be when performing, say, a maintenance wash of a regularly maintained vehicle, as it likely hadn't been treated to anything like this in years, so being super soft with it at this point wouldn't really have made much sense from a cleaning perspective. But either way, aside from the fragile bubbling rust spots, fully hand scrubbed all areas of the van over with a Meguiars Microfibre Mitt, which I find tends to be better suited to heavier duty wash work than more plush items. Then once washed over, the van was thoroughly pressure rinsed off one final time, and because that'd be it wash-wise, made sure I was nice and methodical, as I really couldn't afford to commit to finishing up the cleaning only to run into bits of ingrained dirt during the subsequent stages. The van was then thoroughly dried off with a large twist loop towel from Autoglym Direct, as I wasn't sure if its surface could withstand a twin turbine blow dry. But to be honest, I find a final bit of physical contact with a towel dry like this, for whatever reason, just seems to leave a crispier finish on previously unkept paint. Plus it gives you a good idea of what areas you need to focus on next. So spent some time working it over all parts of the van until it was pretty much streak and smear free. And while I know absorbent twist loop towels like these are generally intended to be dabbed and gently drawn over the surface, that was easier said than done here. Plus, as I say, I just felt a more hands-on approach was more appropriate here. So the previously scrubbed chunky tyres were then thoroughly dressed with Turtle Wax's durable graphene acrylic spray coating, which was first evenly spread over them with a foam applicator pad, before being worked into the tread and texture a bit more thoroughly with a brush, which all in all seemed to work quite well. And I know it's only a little superficial touch, but with a vehicle this old that hasn't been properly tended to for so long, something as simple as dressing tyres that others might well take for granted can still serve to make a big difference, so it was definitely worth devoting the few minutes it took to do. And once it had had a good 5 minutes or so to soak into the rubber, it was gently buffed over with a general purpose towel to leave a nice uniform finish free from any excess that could work its way onto the freshly cleaned rims and hubcaps. With a few hours still to spare before needing to capture any aftershots, decided I'd try to decontaminate and brighten up the white strip that runs around pretty much the entirety of the van. As up close at least it was letting the side down a bit, so gave it a fairly thorough clay barring using the smooth egg stuff I had left over from my previous Soft 99 video, to knock back the heavily bonded contamination as well as a few of the unsightly rust stains, which was a bit of a bonus. And while the entire van really needed the full mechanical decontamination, never would have got it finished in time, so just had to keep to these more obvious bits before moving on to hopefully restore a bit of shine to them with a quick dual action micro polish. So my Autoglym MP9 machine was then deployed with some Turtle Wax one and done compound, which I found to be pretty reliable in most single stage polishing situations, to further decontaminate the white bits and hopefully breathe some life back into them. And while the execution was a bit cack-handed, still thankfully served to leave these parts looking a lot brighter and feeling much smoother than before, so I think it was definitely worth doing, even if just to draw the eye away from the rest of the Tyre paintwork that unfortunately wouldn't be getting fully polished. After that, while I still had the micro polisher to hand, thought I'd see if I could fully knock back the various rust stains and streaks from the main body, as they did look quite unsightly in the flesh, so went ahead and worked the same pad and polish combo over the stains to progressively abrade them away, which thankfully worked well, as sometimes in my experience they're just too deeply entrenched in the lacquer and or base coat to be properly removed. And although the rust bubbles that the stains had come from obviously couldn't be polished away, eliminating their underlying streaks meant they definitely appeared slightly less apparent. Talking about making things less apparent, there was a bit of ghosting on the front end from an old magic mushroom sticker that had to go, so set about that panel with the main flex direct drive machine and a dedicated turtle wax cutting pad, which is specifically designed to work in unison with the one and done compound. And while I didn't want to hit the aging blown over paintwork at full whack, did have to utilise the edge of the pad a bit to dig through its dead top layer. But it was definitely worth it, as aside from the obvious orange peel, which there wasn't a lot I could do about here, was still a vast improvement compared to the unpolished section, which you can see my wavy reflection readily disappearing behind. So repeated the process for the rest of the panel to ensure it was uniformly shiny. And while it would have been nice to fully polish the whole van, with the time it had taken to clean it, could only really afford to polish these few select spots, but they came out looking far more lively than before, and so still helped to lift the overall look. To finish things up then, I decided to give the inside of the glass a good clean, as any marks on it appeared more prominent now that the exterior of it had been washed, so generously sprayed all of it over with some turtle wax mist, thoroughly wiped it down with an old lint-free glass cleaning cloth, then subsequently buffed it off with a small waffle weave towel to remove any unsightly smears and stubborn dirt, which took a bit longer than a car, as this is essentially a house on wheels, so there's transfer and contamination from things like food being cooked and kettles being boiled. But with a good 20 minutes or so spent, managed to get them looking a whole lot better, which again in and of itself wasn't a huge thing, but can still help to make a difference to the overall appearance of a neglected vehicle like this. And I couldn't forget the small sliding windows up top, which had been heavily pressure washed earlier, so needed a good once, twice or thrice over to ensure they were free from any spots. And as you can see from the cloth afterwards, a fair bit of grime had been pulled from the surface, proving it was definitely worth doing. So unless I was to come back for a third day, which wasn't a realistic prospect here, that little lot had to do. And while I'd definitely broken a fair few of the unwritten rules in order to get things done here, reckon despite that the 40-year-old van still came out the other side a much happier camper for it, and could now more capably focus its energies on transporting leisurely essentials rather than an excess of algae, moss and ingrained grime. Now, as always, the vast majority of the tools and products featured here can be found linked below. If for some weird reason you're not already subscribed, then do go ahead and get on board, or at the very least give the video a like, as they take me ages to put together, so any assistance in maintaining traction is greatly appreciated. But that's all from me for now, so thanks for watching, and I'll be back with more as soon as I single-handedly can be.